people in ways that logic won't. And I would just note that in the past month I've discovered a television program that I like for the first time in my life. It's never happened before. I've resented the fact that so many young people get their news from the fake news shows that are the comedy news shows that aren't really fake because they're the first source of news for as many people as the other news shows. But they've been universally cynical and sarcastic and mocking and degrading the corrupt and the righteous alike in equal measure, and stay home or come to a rally for everyone who's smart enough never to have gone to a rally for anything else before, those idiots. And this sort of debilitating, disempowering effect in a different way from the corporate media. But this guy, John Oliver, who's made his way over here from England, is not doing that. He's taking issues that nobody's talking about, so he's not just mocking what the corporate media is doing. He's taking nuclear energy and nuclear weapons and prisons and every injustice, or at least a bunch of them so far, and educating people and energizing people and telling them what to do about it. So this is not the horrendous bill that passed yesterday that we didn't say anything about before, sort of Washington Post style of journalism. This is what you can do to make the world a better place in the coming weeks and months, and funny as hell. So for people who like television, I can't stand it. There's actually a television show I recommend to young people now, and it's John Oliver's.
And I'll just add real quickly, there's, as David was saying, stories, good media, and there's actually great music, hip-hop. There's a whole brand of very politically enlightened and engaged hip-hop, and you can just draw enormous crowds of young people by engaging some of these musicians. And I think just sort of opening up our events and making sure that the issues that young people are struggling with, and poor people, and housing and jobs, it's a whole new ballgame, especially when you can get organizations who are already doing that work to be a part of the agenda so that they're mobilizing their base, and you have kind of joint mobilizations going into the event. Then it becomes this incredibly rich, exciting, fun, multicultural, and arts and music event all rolled into one. And the energy is really exciting.
I would also question the effect of school on children, the positive and negative effects. I think sometimes the teachers can inspire an interest in the current events and peace, but at the same time, the demands of school can be so time-consuming that the young people don't have time to be involved in anything else. Not only that, but I think sometimes school can train you, I know it trained me, to just do the assignment and not think for myself what should be done or what's important in life. Just do what I'm told, get it done, learn what I need for the test, and then quickly move on to the next thing because I don't have much sleep and I have to really hurry. So I think it creates almost like a drone-like feeling for many students. Maybe not all, because I know some students are very active.
Thank you. Yes? I think there's great truth to all wars are bankers' wars, but I think there's I know that, Kristin, you went through all the reasons for violence, but only certain sections. I think you have a longer list. But I think getting funds for elections and getting jobs after your political career and so forth is a cause of wars, as well as is greed and sadism and machismo and pleasing your advisors and those immediately around you, and sort of the banality of distancing yourself and not having to see the violence and so forth. I mean, these are all reasons, but there's not one single root cause for all wars. Every war I've ever looked at has numerous causes, and there's no cause that's invincible. And so when we say the bankers are controlling everything, we have to erase the fact that last September, Raytheon's stock had never been higher. Wall Street knew those missiles were going into Syria, and we stopped those missiles from going into Syria. So, I mean, it's sort of obvious that nothing is invincible, and we can change things if we want to. But for people who have to have it done before they can do it, well, we've done it. We did it in September. on Syria. There's no sort of magical, we can't do anything reason not to do it again and again and again every time they propose a new war and give us a minute to act. Well, I appreciate the question. I think it is very hard for people to recognize the facts of a situation quickly enough, and they are presented with a wide variety of disagreeing claims and perspectives and are expected to act immediately. This is why I wrote a book called War is a Lie, where I sought to depict all the common types of lies and propaganda so that people can recognize them more quickly and not have to wait for classified memos to come out decades later and so forth. I think that it's important that we be particularly skeptical when we see typical types of propaganda. And when we are told that somebody knows enough to drop bombs, who clearly doesn't know much about what's happening on the ground, we ought to be skeptical. When there is no sort of calculation as to how many people, innocent or otherwise, will die from the bombs to weigh against the people who will supposedly be saved by the bombs, there's just absolute demonization of a group in the form of a leader who was typically enough, and this is almost like a qualification now as a new top evil person for the United States, radicalized in a U.S. prison in Iraq. And so we're told that the brutality of slitting someone's throat and converting them to Islam before they die merits dropping tons and tons of bombage on a country. But when they're doing the same thing in Syria, the same people, the same group, it needs to be put in context. They have an evil government in Syria. It might be worth arming them because they're more moderate than these other people who slit throats faster. And so I think we have to be very skeptical of people who and television networks who talk to us this way. But if we can't be, we can also learn from history. And the fact that I think Steve went over, that you can't find an example in the past where humanitarian bombing benefited humanity. We can go through every possible past instance where they claimed it was going to help things and show that it made things much worse, immediately and long term. And if that's not enough to make you skeptical that this one time is going to be different, then we need a real re-education.
I just wanted to put it in context that Islamists are Muslims who would like their governments based on the Sharia, which doesn't necessarily mean something extreme like stoning women, but it can just mean that they would like their governments not to be corrupt and they want them to be just. So it ranges, and many Islamists are very peaceful, who would never dream of harming anybody. Some are violent. Then amongst the violent ones, you have a range of extremity also. But what I find is that often there's a parent organization, say the Muslim Brotherhood long ago, that's peaceful. And when it doesn't achieve its goals, which actually many of them are reasonable in the beginning, then it turns to politics. Then when the politics doesn't work, it turns to violence. And then Muslim Brotherhood eventually became peaceful again, at least in the 1980s or so. But then it still didn't achieve its goals because the government turned a deaf ear to some of its ideas. And then we, in the United States, often hear the most extreme ideas, like, they want to stone their women or something, or force them to dress certain ways. But there are also more reasonable ideas. And I think if we looked at the reasonable ideas, then they would respond back extremely. When the organization is peaceful and it doesn't achieve its goals and it is insistent on staying peaceful, then you get splinter groups that break off. They say, well, we're going to be violent because our parent organization didn't get its goals accomplished. And then even groups can splinter off of that group, which are even more brutal and violent. And I think that's what's happening. You're getting violent, brutal groups. I like what Dave said about it. We have to take with a grain of salt what we're hearing, because they might have some reason to them anyway. But I think as things get more brutal, it's because we didn't, and the government leaders in the Mideast didn't respond to the more reasonable demands in the beginning.
Yeah, just a couple of things quickly. The gentleman began with the aphorism that truth is the first casualty in war. It's actually a casualty earlier than that. course. It's a casualty in preparations for war, and the thinking that makes war and the application of military violence somehow a reasonable response to these situations. And then both Kristin and David had mentioned too that it's was the essence of the gentleman's question, that we're confronted in these moments of crisis with what do you do now, right? There are these besieged Yazidis on Sinjar Mountain, and they're starving to death, and they have no water, and forcing hand. What do we do now? Well, again, this audience knows we don't get in those situations in the first place. Okay, that's the single most important thing I think to take away from these discussions of crisis. These crises are manufactured. This one with ISIS, which now calls itself the Islamic State, this is a direct consequence of the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003. Okay, they're not separate events. Direct consequences. David mentioned al-Baghdadi, the head of ISIS. Hung out in a place you may recall, Abu Ghraib, okay? Direct consequence. Think of most of the crises we've talked about. Jill mentioned the clear connection between fair trade agreements and immigration policy. You think these unaccompanied minors just show up out of the blue on our borders for no reason? It's the mere magnetism of the wonder that is the United States? Or is there some push that goes on in places like Honduras and El Salvador? You can be sure it's the latter more than the former. And again, down the line, grievous mistakes made that then reduce our options for action such that we come down to these little micro responses to crises, and those dominate our politics. Again, this audience knows that we can do better and we need to.
Let's go, and then we'll have time for one more question.
Yeah, I'll just say real briefly, sort of springboarding off of what's been said in Steve's last remarks, that we have this very trigger-happy foreign policy, and we are ready to use military force pervasively and at the smallest excuse, and it benefits the war industry, the weapons industry. We have provided something like 70-80% of all the weapons in the Middle East and the vast majority of the weapons all around the world. So we are vastly predisposed towards military interventions which have demonstrably massively failed, colossally failed, and we're seeing that all over the Middle East right now, from the latest explosions in Pakistan to the utter chaos that reigns in Iraq, in Libya, in Syria. We have massive failure of our foreign policy. We need to begin to develop the reflexes to say no, to intervene against ISIS, which we are supporting in Syria, to just know that our foreign policy by design is interventionist, military, and must be rejected, and that we need a whole-scale revision of our foreign policy that is based on human rights and international law. It's also a violation of our laws to be dropping bombs for humanitarian purposes. We are, the president is not empowered to do that, not to go to war without the approval of Congress, and that humanitarian reasons, however they choose to define it, does not qualify as a reason to override the Constitution. So we need to really buttress our resistance to the propaganda which is pervasive, and to just know that we need to be fearless advocates for peaceful solutions and for saying no to one more encounter, one more violent, horrific encounter after another. We just need to draw the line and say that it stops here.
Excellent question. I feel the tug and pull in myself even, let alone in wings or different organizations of the movement. So latest recent example, Gaza. Right? Right? Does that make you angry?
Yes.
not least of which because our government is complicit, bankrolls, makes possible, justifies, defends, even though this time apparently there was some greater pushback. I mean, is that, you know, here's a challenge to our hope too, right? We're supposed to come out of events like this feeling more hopeful, and I know I almost always do, but again, you know, realistically here, Gaza's a real challenge, right? So I understand we're out of time, so, but just to point out the kind of hypocrisy that circles around this and the sort of thing that people like ourselves need to resist. One frequently hears the question, where's the Palestinian Gandhi? You know the answer, right? Where is he? He's dead or in jail, right? So, again, I understand exactly that pull between nonviolence as tactic versus as a way of life. I guess I remain in struggle in that, and I'm in sympathy with others who are.
I do think it is a struggle, just as building the progressive convergence that Jill spoke of and working with libertarians who agree with us on all the bad things and disagree with us on all the good things is a struggle. I think, however, that to a great extent, nonviolence as a way of life is a good tactic. And that if you're going to be a serious activist, you can't spend most of your time thinking hateful thoughts and then go out and do an hour training and use nonviolence in a protest and expect to affect the greater change that nonviolence has been proven to affect. I don't think it works that way. If I'm personally attacked in the woods, I will fight back, so maybe I'm not a pacifist. But for the rest of it, for political engagement, for mass movements, for 99% of the questions you might ask me, nonviolence is my answer. And I think Kristin mentioned that we tried to impeach a certain president and vice president, and we were accused of hating them, of not liking them for various superficial reasons and being vengeful. And there were certainly a great many people in that movement about whom that was true to one degree or another. But we argued over and over again, no. The reason we want those people impeached and prosecuted and punished is because if they are not, it will be repeated and expanded by the next person of whatever race, sex, party, etc. And the abuses and crimes that have been made acceptable and legitimate and mainstream and not even noticed under President Obama, from lawless imprisonment to widespread spying and eavesdropping to infringements on our rights to speech and assembly to crackdown on whistleblowers and assault on journalists to murder by drone and assassination of the people that matter, the U.S. citizens and everybody else. I mean, this could not have happened if there was any sort of pushback against the individuals at the top of the machinery during the last cycle. And so we need to be clear in our minds that enforcing the rule of law has a place, but to do it out of any sort of ill will towards someone like Dick Cheney or George W. Bush is wrong, and it's very difficult to keep focused on how it's wrong because exploiting it builds the movement so incredibly rapidly because there are so many people who love to hate someone. I do online activism at rootsaction.org. We do petitions, and when we abuse some nasty official, the thousands of people who will sign that petition or send that email compared to if we just promote some decent policy is incredible. But we have to resist that tendency to build hatred and resentment and personalization of policies into our activism because ultimately it doesn't help us.